Before the rockets, before the headlines, before the world learned his name, there was a quiet boy staring at the ceiling of a small room in South Africa, wondering why he felt so different, and whether that difference was a curse or a calling. Pretoria, South Africa, 1970s. A city of wide skies and rigid expectations. A place where children were taught to fit in, not stand out. And into this world, Elon Musk was born on June 28, 1971, into a family that, on the surface, looked stable, educated, respectable, but stability is not the same as safety, and comfort is not the same as belonging. His mother, May Musk, was a model and a dietitian, strong, disciplined, constantly working. His father, Elon Musk, was an engineer, intelligent, demanding, and emotionally complex. The marriage didn't last. When it ended, it left behind more than separation. It left silence, tension, emotional distance that a child could feel but not name. Elon was not the loud kid. He was not the popular one. He was the kid who disappeared. Teachers noticed it first. He would drift, his eyes would lock onto something invisible. Sometimes he wouldn't respond at all when spoken to. They thought he was slow, distracted, maybe broken in some small, unnamed way. But inside his mind, galaxies were forming. At home, he escaped into books, not children's stories, but encyclopedias, science fiction, physics. Isaac Asimov, Douglas Adams. He didn't read to pass time, he read to survive. Books became a shield, a refuge, a doorway out of a world that felt loud and confusing. By the time he was 9, he had read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. Not because someone told him to, but because curiosity was the only place he felt alive. School, on the other hand, was brutal. Elon was different, and children are unforgiving to those who don't blend in. He spoke strangely, thought deeply, missed social cues. He was thin, awkward, and often alone. That made him a target. The bullying was not subtle, it was violent. He was chased, mocked, pushed down stairwells, punched in hallways. Once a group of boys threw him down a flight of stairs and beat him until he lost consciousness. He was hospitalized, his face swollen, his body bruised. But the deeper wounds were invisible. No one came to save him. That moment, lying there, hurt and humiliated, did something to him. It taught him early that the world does not pause for your pain. That being different has a cost, and that if you want to survive, you must build something inside yourself that no one else can take away. So he did, while other kids chased approval. Elon chased understanding. While they played games, he built them. At age 10, he discovered computers. At 12, he taught himself programming, not through formal instruction, but through obsession. Hours alone, lines of code, trial and error, failure after failure, until one day, it worked. He created a video game and sold it. He was 12 years old. The amount wasn't large, but the meaning was. It was proof. Proof that something inside his head, something no one else could see, had value in the real world. That ideas could become tools, that imagination could become leverage. But outside that small victory, life remained heavy. After his parents' divorce, Elon chose to live with his father for a period of time, a decision he would later describe as deeply difficult. The household was intellectually demanding, emotionally tense. Expectations were high, warmth was scarce, conversations were not gentle. Criticism came easier than praise. So Elon learned something else very young: self-reliance. He learned not to ask for validation, not to expect comfort, not to depend on anyone to understand him. He learned to endure. Years later, he would publicly say that he has Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism that affects social interaction and communication. But long before there was a word for it, he felt it. That sense of being out of sync, of thinking in systems while the world spoke in emotions, of seeing patterns where others saw chaos. That isolation carved him, sharpened him. He wasn't dreaming of money, or fame, or status. He was dreaming of escape. Escape from a place that felt too small, from a future that felt pre-written, from gravity itself. America became the idea, not as a country, but as possibility. A place where obsession could be rewarded instead of punished, where thinking differently might not get you beaten. At 17, with very little money and no safety net, he left South Africa. He moved to Canada first, staying with relatives, working odd jobs, cleaning boilers, shoveling grain, doing work that burned the body but kept the dream alive. Every job, every night, every moment of exhaustion whispered the same question: is this worth it? But even then, before the companies, before the failures, before the world knew who he was, there was something unbreakable forming. A belief that if you understand the fundamentals of reality, you can bend them. That belief didn't come from success. It came from pain, from being misunderstood, from being alone, from learning early that no one was coming to rescue him. And as the boy became a young man, stepping into a world far harsher than he imagined, the real test was still ahead, because curiosity can carry you only so far. Soon, reality would push back, harder, relentlessly, and the question would no longer be who am I, but how much am I willing to lose to become it? That's where the struggle truly begins. End of section 1. Awaiting your command, continue with next section. Continue with next section. Section 2, struggles, failures, rejection, hook. Every dream looks clean from a distance, but up close, where failure breathes down your neck, dreams bleed, starve, and test how much pain you're willing to endure before you walk away. Canada was not the promised land Elon imagined. It was cold, it was lonely, and it was unforgiving. He enrolled at Queen's University in Ontario, then transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. On paper, everything looked right: physics, economics, elite education. But beneath the surface, survival was a daily calculation. Tuition had to be paid, rent had to be covered. Pride had to be swallowed. He lived cheaply, ate simply, worked whenever he could. While others planned careers, Elon was already planning escape velocity, how to break free from the slow gravity of ordinary life. In 1995, he made a decision that terrified everyone around him. He dropped out of Stanford University, just 2 days after enrolling in a PhD program. 2 days. To most people, it sounded insane. Stanford was safety, prestige, a guaranteed future. Walking away from it meant choosing uncertainty, total uncertainty, at a time when the internet was still a fragile idea, not a proven industry. But Elon could feel it. The ground was shifting. Technology was accelerating faster than institutions, and if he waited, he would miss the moment. So he jumped. No backup plan, no trust fund, no applause, just belief, and fear riding shotgun. He and his brother Kimball started a company called Zip2. The idea was simple: help newspapers get online maps and business directories. The execution was brutal. They couldn't afford an office, so they slept in the office they eventually rented, on the floor, showered at the YMCA, ate whatever was cheapest. Elon coded through the night, collapsing from exhaustion, then waking up to do it again. This wasn't hustle culture, this was survival. He wasn't a CEO. He was the engineer, the janitor, the IT department, and the support desk. Rejection came daily. Investors dismissed him. Newspapers didn't trust him. Experienced executives looked at this young immigrant with an accent and zero pedigree and thought, who does he think he is? Even when Zip2 began to gain traction, Elon wasn't celebrated. He was tolerated. Board members questioned his leadership. Eventually, they pushed him out of the CEO role. Imagine that. You build something from nothing. You bleed into it. You sleep on the floor for it. And when it finally works, you're told you're not good enough to lead it. That cut deep. But in 1999, Zip2 was sold for nearly $300 million. Elon walked away with around $22 million. To the outside world, it looked like success. To Elon, it felt incomplete. Money didn't quiet the hunger. It amplified it. So he reinvested, almost recklessly, into his next idea, X.com, an online banking company that would later become PayPal. Again, the pattern repeated. Long hours, relentless pressure, internal conflict. Elon pushed hard, sometimes too hard. He questioned everything, challenged everyone. His intensity was misunderstood. His management style clashed with others. The board grew uneasy, and once again, history echoed. While he was on his honeymoon, Elon was removed as CEO, gone, from the company he founded. Think about that moment. You finally make it. You finally build something big, and the very system you created decides you're the problem. That kind of rejection doesn't just attack your resume, it attacks your identity. Most people would stop there. Take the money, buy comfort, protect their ego, disappear quietly into success. Elon did the opposite. When PayPal was sold to eBay in 2002, he walked away with roughly $180 million. And then, he bet it all, not figuratively, literally. He poured his money into 2 ideas most people laughed at: electric cars, private space rockets. This was not a popular time to believe in either. The auto industry was dominated by giants. Space was controlled by governments. Elon was neither Detroit nor NASA. He was an outsider with ambition and no protection. Investors called him naive. Engineers doubted him. The media treated him like a rich guy playing sci-fi fantasies. But he wasn't playing. He founded SpaceX with the goal of making space travel cheaper, and ultimately, making humanity multiplanetary. He invested heavily in Tesla, a struggling electric car startup on the edge of collapse. The failures came fast. Rocket launches failed, exploded, again and again. Millions burned in seconds. Headlines mocked him. Late-night jokes turned him into a punchline. At Tesla, production problems piled up, cash hemorrhaged, deadlines slipped. Skeptics grew louder. Employees questioned leadership, competitors waited for collapse, and the money, his money, was disappearing. By 2008, everything was falling apart at once. SpaceX had failed 3 launches. One more failure meant bankruptcy. Tesla was weeks away from running out of cash. Elon was going through a painful divorce. He was sleeping at factories, barely seeing his children, living under a pressure most people will never experience. At one point, he had to borrow money to pay rent. From billionaire to nearly broke. Let that sink in. Years of work, years of sacrifice, years of belief, all hanging by a thread. Every logical voice said the same thing. Quit, cut your losses, save yourself. But logic doesn't build the impossible. In those moments, when the world was closing in, when failure felt inevitable, Elon didn't see himself as unlucky. He saw himself as responsible, and responsibility is heavy, because when you take it fully, you have no one else to blame. The pressure wasn't just financial, it was public, personal, existential. Each failure wasn't just a business setback, it felt like proof that maybe everyone else had been right all along, that maybe the kid who didn't fit in never really would. And as the noise grew louder, as the walls closed tighter, the greatest battle was no longer external, it was internal. Because the real question wasn't whether the companies would survive, it was whether he would. And that silent war, fought alone, in the darkest hours of exhaustion and doubt, is where the story turns inward, where the mind becomes both battlefield and prison. That's where the deepest struggle begins. There are moments when failure isn't loud, when it doesn't scream or explode, but whispers to you at night, asking the same quiet question over and over: how much longer can you hold on? Success stories rarely show this part. They skip the insomnia, they edit out the panic, they erase the nights when your body is present. But your mind is somewhere else entirely, trapped in endless loops of fear and responsibility. For Elon Musk, this was not a phase, it was a season of psychological war. By the mid-2000s, the weight was unbearable. Every day began with impossible decisions and ended with unanswered questions. He was running multiple companies simultaneously, each one fighting for oxygen, each one capable of destroying him if it failed, and they were failing. Sleep became fragmented, sometimes non-existent. He worked until his hands trembled, until his voice cracked, until thinking felt like walking through fog. When exhaustion finally forced him to lie down, his mind refused to shut off. What if the rocket fails again? What if the company collapses tomorrow? What if everyone who trusted me loses everything? These weren't abstract worries, they were immediate, personal, financial. Thousands of employees depended on him. Investors watched his every move. The public waited for him to fall. And beneath all of that, there was no emotional safety net. Elon has spoken openly about experiencing intense stress, anxiety, and emotional pain during this period. He has described moments of unrelenting pressure, times when waking up felt heavier than going to sleep. The world saw a billionaire innovator, but inside there was a man stretched to his psychological limits, questioning whether the cost of his ambition was greater than the reward. Loneliness amplified everything. Leadership is isolating by nature. But leading on the edge of failure, that's a different kind of solitude. You can't fully share the fear, you can't burden others with doubts that might break morale. So you carry it alone. Every decision becomes a potential catastrophe. If you pivot, you risk collapse. If you stay the course, you risk collapse. There is no safe move, only less dangerous ones. During the worst moments, Elon slept on factory floors, in conference rooms, on couches that smelled like stress and burnt coffee. He lived inside his work, not as a symbol of hustle, but because there was no separation left between the man and the mission. His identity dissolved into the outcome. If SpaceX failed, he failed. If Tesla collapsed, he collapsed. That fusion is dangerous, because when your sense of self is tied entirely to success, failure doesn't just hurt, it threatens your existence. He has spoken about crying alone, about moments where the emotional pain felt overwhelming, about the constant sense that everything could end tomorrow. And yet, he kept showing up, not because he felt strong, but because stopping felt worse. This is the part no one applauds, the quiet endurance, the internal screaming, the choice to get up, not inspired, not confident, but exhausted and afraid. People often ask, how do you handle that kind of pressure? The uncomfortable truth is, you don't handle it, you survive it. One breath at a time, one decision at a time, one long, painful day stacked on top of another. There were moments when the doubt was deafening. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe this can't be done, maybe I'm pushing too hard, or not hard enough. And then there was the guilt, Guilt for the people who followed him into uncertainty. Guilt for the time taken from family. Guilt for choosing impossible goals when easier paths were available. The mind turns against itself in those moments. It replays every mistake, every harsh word, every decision that didn't work. It builds a case against you, methodically, mercilessly. And there is no jury to defend you. This is where many people quit. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack intelligence, but because the emotional weight becomes too heavy to carry. Because the voice inside says, enough. Elon stood at that edge. He has said there were times he didn't know if he would make it through. Times when the stress felt physically painful. Times when the future looked like a wall, not a horizon. But something kept him from stepping back. Not optimism, not certainty. Purpose. A stubborn, irrational belief that the problems he was trying to solve mattered more than his comfort. That belief didn't erase the pain. It gave the pain meaning, and meaning changes everything. When suffering has no meaning, it destroys you. When suffering serves a mission, it shapes you, slowly, almost imperceptibly. His relationship with fear began to shift. Failure stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like a signal, a message. Data. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it stopped being paralyzing. He learned to sit with it, work through it, use it. That transformation didn't happen overnight. It came from being pushed to the absolute limit and realizing he was still standing, still breathing, still thinking, still capable of action. And somewhere in that darkness, a realization began to form that the pain he was running from was the very thing preparing him for a moment that would decide everything. Because when you've stared at collapse long enough, you stop fearing it, and when fear loosens its grip, that's when change becomes possible. That's when the turning point begins. Sometimes the moment that changes everything doesn't arrive with applause or certainty. It arrives quietly at the edge of failure, when there is nothing left to lose. The year the world itself seemed to break. Markets collapsed. Companies folded. Trust evaporated overnight. And for Elon Musk, it wasn't just an economic crisis. It was personal. SpaceX was on its last breath. 3 rocket launches had failed. Each failure wasn't just a technical setback, it was a public spectacle. Fireballs in the sky. Millions of dollars reduced to debris, critics circled, investors disappeared, engineers grew anxious. One more failure, and it was over. No more money, no more company, no more second chances. At the same time, Tesla was bleeding out, production delays, mounting debt, suppliers demanding payment. The company had weeks, maybe days, before it ran out of cash. Elon had already poured nearly everything he owned into keeping both companies alive. There was no reserve, no safety net, no exit strategy. This wasn't a motivational crossroads, this was survival. And in the middle of that chaos, something shifted, not in the world, in him. Elon made a decision, one that would define everything that followed. He chose to stop hedging. No more half measures, no more playing defense, no more trying to protect what little was left. If this was going to end, it would end with total commitment. At SpaceX, he doubled down on first principles thinking, breaking problems down to their most fundamental truths. Instead of asking how rockets were traditionally built, he asked why they were so expensive in the first place. The answers were uncomfortable. Supply chains were bloated, processes were inefficient, assumptions were outdated. So he challenged all of it. Internal manufacturing, vertical integration, relentless simplification. It wasn't popular, it wasn't safe, but it was necessary. At Tesla, he took direct control of product and engineering decisions. He became deeply involved, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. He slept at the factory, walked the production line, fixed problems at their source, not as a CEO hiding behind spreadsheets, but as a builder refusing to let the thing die. This wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. When everything is on the line, the noise fades, titles disappear, fear becomes background static. And what remains is focus, sharp, unforgiving focus. There is a strange calm that comes when you accept the worst-case scenario. Elon accepted it. He has said that during this period he came to terms with failure. That he decided he would rather fail trying something meaningful than succeed at something trivial. That acceptance was the turning point. Because once you stop running from fear, it loses its power. Then came the moment. September 28, 2008, SpaceX prepared for its 4th launch, the Falcon 1. The team had done everything they could. Rechecked systems, rewritten code, fixed what had broken before. But space is unforgiving. It does not care how badly you want it to work. The rocket lifted off. Seconds passed, then minutes. This time, no explosion. The rocket reached orbit, success. For the first time, a privately developed liquid-fueled rocket had made it to orbit. In that instant, everything changed, not because the struggle was over, but because proof had arrived. Proof that the impossible could bend. Proof that the pain hadn't been pointless. Proof that persistence, applied with intelligence, could rewrite reality. And just weeks later, when Tesla was on the brink of collapse, another miracle followed. A last-minute financing round came together, saving the company from bankruptcy by a razor-thin margin. 2 companies, 2 near deaths, 2 survivals. But don't misunderstand this moment. This wasn't luck. Luck may open a door, but only if you're still standing when it appears. What changed in Elon wasn't his intelligence or ambition. It was his relationship with risk. He stopped trying to avoid it and started mastering it. He learned that the edge of collapse is not just a place of danger, it's a place of truth, where excuses are stripped away, where comfort is irrelevant, where only what truly matters remains. From that point forward, every challenge was met differently. Not with panic, but with precision. Not with ego, but with learning. The boy who once escaped into books had become a man willing to confront reality head-on. Not because he felt invincible, but because he had already survived the worst. And when you survive the worst, you realize you are harder to break than you thought. The turning point wasn't the rocket launch. It was the internal shift that made that launch possible. The moment he chose meaning over safety. The moment he accepted failure as the price of progress. The moment he stopped asking, what if this doesn't work? And started asking, what if it does and I didn't try? From that decision forward, everything changed, but change is only potential. What comes next is discipline, relentless, unforgiving, transformative, because surviving the turning point is one thing, becoming worthy of it, that requires a different level of commitment. That's where the transformation begins. Survival gives you a second chance. Discipline decides whether you deserve it. After 2008, nothing felt theoretical anymore. Elon Musk had seen the bottom, felt the walls closing in, stared down failure so closely that it no longer frightened him. But surviving collapse is not the same as building greatness. Survival is instinct, greatness is structure, and structure is forged through discipline. From this point forward, Elon's life became an exercise in controlled intensity. Not chaos, not blind hustle, but deliberate, almost brutal focus on what mattered. And the willingness to let everything else burn away. He didn't suddenly become balanced. He became precise. Time became his most valuable currency. And he treated it like oxygen. His days were broken into 5-minute blocks, meetings compressed, conversations sharpened. Every moment had to justify its existence, not because he loved working, but because the mission demanded it. At SpaceX, the standard changed. Good enough was no longer acceptable. Every component, every system, every decision was questioned down to its most basic assumptions. If something was expensive, he asked why. If it was slow, he asked how to remove friction. If someone said, that's just how it's done, he pushed harder, not to dominate, but to understand. This is where first principles thinking became more than a philosophy. It became survival strategy. Elon trained himself and his teams to ignore analogy and tradition, to strip problems down to physics, materials, math. What is this made of? What does it cost at its core? What is physically possible? That mindset transformed everything. At Tesla, the same discipline applied. He wasn't chasing luxury, he was chasing efficiency. He lived inside factories, slept near production lines, walked through bottlenecks personally. When something broke, he didn't delegate blame, he traced the failure to its root. This was not inspirational leadership, it was demanding, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes abrasive. Always intense. People quit, people struggled, people questioned whether the pace was humane. And Elon accepted that, not because he didn't care, but because he believed the work was bigger than comfort. Transformation requires sacrifice. He sacrificed sleep, he sacrificed leisure, he sacrificed normalcy. Birthdays blurred, holidays disappeared. His personal life fractured under the strain, relationships suffered. Time with family was limited. There is no romantic version of this. Discipline costs you something, and the price is paid daily. But something else began to change too. The chaos that once ruled his mind gave way to rhythm. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it became manageable, predictable, a signal instead of a storm. He learned where to place his attention and where not to waste it. He stopped reacting, he started executing. The discipline wasn't just external, it was internal. He learned to endure discomfort without dramatizing it, to work while tired, to think while stressed, to remain functional when everything inside screamed for relief. This is a skill most people never develop, because it's learned only through repetition, through choosing the hard thing again and again. Long after motivation has died, there were no speeches to himself, no affirmations, no illusions of ease, just work. Day after day, problem after problem, failure after failure, and slowly, almost invisibly, progress stacked. Rockets improved, processes tightened, costs dropped, Tesla's production stabilized, vehicles improved. Public perception shifted, not because of marketing, but because the product spoke for itself. This is what discipline looks like in real life. Not flashy, not loud, not motivational. Relentless. It's waking up when your body is begging for rest. It's making decisions when you're mentally drained. It's staying with a problem long after others have walked away. Elon didn't become disciplined because he enjoyed it. He became disciplined because the mission required it. And somewhere in that grind, a transformation occurred. The boy who once escaped reality through imagination became a man capable of reshaping reality through execution, not by force of personality, but by consistency. Discipline sharpened his thinking, toughened his resolve, narrowed his focus. It turned fear into fuel and doubt into data. And with each disciplined day, the gap between vision and reality grew smaller, still fragile, still uncertain, but no longer impossible. Because discipline doesn't guarantee success. It earns you the right to keep going. And as momentum finally began to build, slowly, painfully, undeniably, the world started to notice, not the struggle, not the sacrifice, the results. And with results comes attention. With attention comes pressure. And with pressure comes the true rise. That's where the ascent begins. The rise doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, when persistence finally meets momentum and the world realizes you were never chasing attention, you were building inevitability. For years, Elon Musk worked in the shadows of skepticism, even after surviving collapse, even after discipline reshaped everything, even after progress became undeniable. Doubt didn't disappear. It evolved. Now the question wasn't will he fail, it was can this really scale? At SpaceX, success came not as a single breakthrough, but as a series of hard-won steps. Falcon 1 proved orbit was possible. Falcon 9 proved it could be done repeatedly, reliably, at lower cost. Then came the idea that once sounded absurd, even to industry veterans: reusable rockets. The space industry had accepted waste as normal. Rockets were discarded into the ocean after a single use. Elon refused that assumption. He saw it as a flaw hiding in plain sight. If airplanes were reusable, why not rockets? The early attempts were humbling. Rockets crashed into the ocean, tipped over, exploded on landing. Each failure was broadcast globally, each mistake dissected in public. But the process continued. Iteration, learning, refinement, until one day a Falcon 9 booster descended from the sky and landed upright on a drone ship. It looked unreal, like science fiction rendered into reality. That moment didn't just change SpaceX. It changed the economics of space. Costs dropped dramatically. Access expanded. Governments took notice. NASA awarded SpaceX major contracts, trusting a private company to resupply the International Space Station, a responsibility once reserved for superpowers. Now in the hands of a team that had nearly gone bankrupt years earlier. This wasn't overnight success. It was a decade of near misses, discipline, and faith during uncertainty. At Tesla, the climb was just as punishing. The Model S proved electric cars could be fast, beautiful, and desirable. The Model X followed, but the true test came with the Model 3, a mass-market vehicle intended to bring electric mobility to the world. And once again, reality pushed back. Production hell, Elon called it. Factories struggled. Automation failed. Bottlenecks choked progress. Deadlines slipped. Critics declared the experiment dead. Elon responded the only way he knew how. He moved into the factory, not symbolically, literally, sleeping on the floor, working alongside engineers, solving problems in real time, rewriting processes, tearing down what didn't work and rebuilding it. Again, the pressure was enormous, the scrutiny relentless. But slowly production climbed, quality improved, deliveries accelerated, and then something shifted. The cars were everywhere, silent, electric, efficient. Tesla didn't just survive, it reshaped an industry. Major automakers, once dismissive, rushed to follow. Electric vehicles became inevitable. The future arrived faster than expected, and Elon Musk, once ridiculed as reckless, became one of the most influential figures in technology and engineering. But the rise wasn't about titles or net worth. It was about validation, not from critics, not from markets, from reality itself. The ideas worked, not all of them, not perfectly. but enough to prove that persistence, guided by discipline and grounded in first principles, could bend industries. SpaceX went on to achieve what many thought impossible, landing rockets routinely, launching astronauts and advancing the long-term vision of Mars. Tesla pushed boundaries in energy storage, solar power, and sustainable transport, each achievement stacked on the last, not as a victory lap, but as a platform for the next challenge. This is the part people misunderstand. The rise didn't make things easier. It made them heavier, more responsibility, more eyes, more consequences. But by this point, Elon was no longer defined by fear of failure. He had lived there, survived there, built from there. So when uncertainty returned, as it always does, he met it differently. With patience, with resolve, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've already endured the worst. The rise wasn't about winning. It was about continuing. Continuing when the world finally believes in you and expects results. Continuing when the stakes are higher than ever. Continuing when the mission still feels unfinished. Because for Elon Musk, achievement was never the destination. It was proof of concept. Evidence that impossible problems could be approached, one disciplined step at a time. And with that proof came something far more valuable than success: perspective. Perspective earned through pain. And from that perspective emerged lessons, raw, practical, and hard-won. Lessons written not in theory, but in scars. That's where the meaning is revealed. Pain is not the enemy. The real enemy is wasting it. When the noise fades, when the headlines move on and the numbers stop flashing, what remains are the lessons carved by failure. Not the kind you quote, the kind you carry. Elon Musk's journey is often summarized by outcomes. Companies built, industries disrupted, wealth accumulated. But the truth lives underneath those results, in the patterns forged by suffering. The first lesson is simple but unforgiving. Comfort is the slowest way to die. Every major leap in Elon's life came from discomfort. Leaving South Africa with no guarantees, dropping out of Stanford, betting his entire fortune on ideas everyone mocked. None of those decisions felt safe. Comfort would have protected him. It also would have buried him. If you are waiting to feel ready, you are already late. Growth begins where reassurance ends. The second lesson is harsher. Failure is information, if you're willing to listen. Each rocket explosion taught SpaceX something real. Each production breakdown at Tesla exposed a flawed assumption. Failure wasn't treated as humiliation, it was treated as data. Most people personalize failure. They turn it into a verdict on their worth. Elon treated it like a message. What broke? Why did it break? How do we prevent it next time? If you learn nothing from pain, it repeats itself. If you study it, pain becomes progress. The third lesson is one few people want to hear. Belief is not optimism, belief is endurance. There were no guarantees, no moments where Elon knew everything would work. What he had wasn't confidence, it was commitment. He didn't believe because success was likely. He believed because the mission mattered. Belief is showing up when hope is thin and energy is gone. It's staying when logic says leave. It's choosing meaning over relief. The fourth lesson is deeply uncomfortable. Being misunderstood is part of doing something new. Elon was called reckless, unrealistic, arrogant, delusional. The criticism didn't stop when he succeeded, it intensified. If you need universal approval, you will never build anything disruptive. The cost of originality is isolation, and if you cannot tolerate being misunderstood, you will always be average. The fifth lesson cuts even deeper. Responsibility is heavy, but it gives life weight. Elon carried the livelihoods of thousands on his shoulders. That pressure nearly broke him. But it also gave his work gravity. Easy goals don't demand much from you. Important goals demand everything. The weight you feel is not a sign you're failing. It's a sign that what you're doing matters. Another lesson emerges from the darkest moments. Your lowest point is not your identity. In 2008, Elon was nearly broke, divorced, exhausted, and publicly doubted. On paper, it looked like collapse. But collapse was not the end. It was the forge. Your worst chapter does not define your story unless you stop writing. And perhaps the most overlooked lesson of all. You don't need balance to build something meaningful. You need alignment. Elon's life was not balanced. It was extreme. But it was aligned. Every sacrifice pointed toward a purpose he believed in. Balance is comfort. Alignment is power. When your actions align with something larger than yourself, endurance becomes possible. These lessons are not motivational slogans. They are survival truths. They don't promise happiness. They don't guarantee success. They offer something harder and more valuable: agency. The understanding that pain can be used, that failure can be instructive, that meaning can be chosen, even in chaos. Elon Musk didn't escape suffering, he extracted value from it. And that is the difference. Because in the end, success doesn't belong to the strongest or the smartest. It belongs to those who refuse to waste their pain. And that brings us to the final question. Not about rockets, not about wealth, not about Elon Musk, but about you. Because every story like this ends the same way, not with admiration, but with a challenge. That's where the journey turns outward. One day, you will look back on this moment and realize it was either the excuse you hid behind or the turning point you chose. Elon Musk's story is not about genius, it's not about money, it's not about being extraordinary. It's about response to pain, response to failure, response to moments where quitting would have been reasonable, understandable, even applauded. He was not protected from hardship, he was shaped by it. The boy who was bullied, the student who didn't fit in, the founder who was fired from his own companies, the man who stood one failure away from losing everything. None of those moments guaranteed greatness. They offered a choice. And that same choice is in front of you right now. Not in the future. Not when conditions improve. Not when confidence arrives. Now, because the truth is, you don't need a perfect plan. You need courage to begin while uncertain, discipline to continue while exhausted, and honesty to face what isn't working. Most people wait for clarity, but clarity comes after action. Elon didn't wake up one day fearless. He acted while afraid. He moved while doubting. He worked while drained. He didn't eliminate risk. He accepted responsibility for it. And that is the difference between dreaming and building. Your pain is not random. The frustration you feel, the rejection you've experienced, the sense that you're capable of more but trapped where you are. That tension is not a flaw, it's an invitation to stop numbing yourself with distractions, to stop explaining why now isn't the right time, to stop waiting for permission you will never receive. Because the world doesn't reward potential, it rewards persistence. It doesn't care how much you want it, it cares how long you're willing to work without applause. Elon Musk didn't change the world by avoiding discomfort. He leaned into it again and again, until discomfort became familiar and fear lost its authority. You don't need to build rockets, you don't need to start a billion-dollar company, but you do need to choose something that matters enough to suffer for, something that scares you a little, something that demands consistency, something that will force you to grow into a stronger version of yourself. So here is the call to action, simple but not easy. Choose one meaningful action today, not tomorrow, not next week, today. Send the message you've been avoiding, start the project you keep postponing, take the first step, even if it's small, even if it's messy. Because momentum doesn't start with confidence, it starts with movement. And years from now, when you look back at this chapter, when you measure the distance between who you were and who you became, it won't be the obstacles that stand out. It will be the moment you stopped negotiating with your fear. The moment you decided that comfort was no longer enough. The moment you chose meaning over excuses. That moment can be now, not because you're ready, but because waiting has already cost you enough.